what exactly got you started on this topic of doing Hacker Dumberly?
It was, I don't know, it was a series of, it was one of those things that I get from new people, like a series of questions like, hey, wait, can I share my screen or my?
Yep, we got your screen. You don't see it right now.
Not my video. Do you want my ugly, my face here? Or?
No. For whatever reason, this room, GoToWebinar, does not know why, but the webcams are not working in this room.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm not wearing pants, so I can stand up. Okay,
yes, fantastic. Well, I hope your camera's not down there normally.
So anyways, the backstory on that was I was getting asked all the time by new people, like, I don't know if I could do this job. I'm not ready for it. And just talking through just a bunch of just dead simple things. And I saw it's sort of an ironic thing that I'll kind of talk about in a little bit more depth, but some of the more advanced people were missing some simple things that the newer people were getting, and frankly, myself included. And then taking that step back, I was like, man, this is easier than it should have been, but I was just thinking too high. So it's kind of a fun talk. I mean, Derek and I did a version of this. Derek Banks at Buck Hills did a version of this a couple of times. We just had a lot of fun with it. Just tons of fun. Just talking through some really simple stuff that is commonly sort of unfortunately overlooked sometimes. That can have that significant impact.
Well, and it's like I've told you, looking back on the years where I was doing a lot of testing, it seemed like a lot of the stuff that I did was just like crap would fall out of the sky and just work for me. Like, oh, I'll try this password. Oh, crap, that worked. But,
exactly.
But no, you have some amazing ones in your previous presentation. Looking forward to see the ones that you have here. I think probably one of the best examples I have, I'm going to pick on Joff for a little bit. When Joff first started pen testing, he jumped right into a test with a very difficult bank. And they put him on a workstation. He was trying all kinds of privilege escalation techniques and all kinds of crazy cool stuff. And he was stuck for about a week. And then I'm like, well, throughout that week, I was like, dude, have you checked different files and file shares? Kind of before we had like Share Finder and tools like that. And he was like, no, I haven't done that yet, but I'm going to try this technique that I read about. I'm going to try this technique. And sure enough, like 5 minutes looking into a file share, there was a share there. It was like passwords, and it had a bunch of passwords to servers around the entire environment. It doesn't necessarily have to be hard, right?
Well, and frankly, that was one of the big pieces where I had that epiphany. We had a test for a financial institution, and they were locked down hard. I mean, it was absolutely brutal. It was one of those first sort of apex defenders, and we were getting absolutely nowhere. I mean, it was painful. It wasn't fun. And then we started looking around at the file shares, and users were setting up file shares all over the place and sharing financial information. And this was a financial institution where you had to have $10 million to come knock on their door. So every single one of those bank accounts had more zeros than I've ever seen before. And as a bad guy, you don't need all of the data, right? You just need the one. And we sort of forget that sometimes. Like, we need that DA, we need that database, and frankly, you don't. It doesn't take much to live in some of these countries for the rest of your life. Frankly, for $10 million, you could live pretty darn well in the U.S. for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
Let alone these other countries where you could, pretty darn near buy the entire thing.
Well, I think it's time to shut down the Inside of the Hackers Studio Q&A session and time to kick it over to you for your presentation. So everybody, Tim Medin with Red Siege, hacking Dumberly, not harder. Redid.
I have no idea. It's funny I have no idea how to pronounce that. I put it in there, and I'm like, is that because I want to say redid, but like French, but then I sound dumb. But I want to say redux, but then I feel like I'm trying to murder French. So
I'm glad I took that bullet for you.
Yeah, I was actually going to actively avoid using that word. So I'm glad you took it for me. So anyways, yeah, thanks for everybody for coming out. Oddly enough, I'm actually in San Diego. I can see the former Con Hotel from the window here. Well, the rest of the family is in San Diego. I just want to walk through some sort of examples here of some kind of the simple hacks that you'll see, kind of fun stories related to that as well. I'm going to keep the questions and comments. I like to see if we can keep this kind of interactive. If you've got some questions or comments along the way, happy to take some of those. One of the things that I've learned over my career is it's important to be lazy in IT, which sounds really weird. I remember in 8th grade, we had Mr. Kaler, and I'm sure some of you out there are of that same age. Remember the printers that had the track paper, right? You could make like cool banners because it was all together and it had that little stuff on the side. But you could make these monster banners, right? And on this banner, he had this saying, and I forget exactly what it was, but it was something to the effect of the best programmers are the laziest people. And I remember seeing that and just being shocked because I always had been told during my classes, don't be lazy, work hard. And then he literally the first day explained it to us, like, why is it important to be lazy? He's like, because the computer is really good at doing the same thing twice. Don't do that yourself, right? So, try some of that simple stuff first, and sort of an extra on that story. I remember my mom came in for parent-teacher conferences, and she came home and she was just livid. Like, I can't believe Kaylor is telling you guys to be lazy, blah, blah, blah. And I tried to explain to her why that made sense, and it was lost on her. So we just agreed to disagree. But when it comes to hacking, it's important to remember, do some of the simple stuff first, right? Try dumb. And this is what the real world bad guys are doing here. We always talk about APT, right? APT is the one that has breached every single organization because, frankly, no one wants to admit it's a 16-year-old kid in mom's basement, which literally happened. This was Apple, right? We think Apple, we think pretty good security. I know some of you probably don't, but whatever. Big, giant Apple. They were breached by a 16-year-old kid in Melbourne. And when the police came to the kid's house, they found all of the Apple files in a directory on his desktop in a directory called Hacky Hack. In fact, I was wearing my Hacky Hack shirt, but you can't see me right now. But you don't have to be this super advanced attacker. And frankly, many of the breaches that we see, it's not some brand new ODay that's the way in. It is not some sort of custom payload that ended up getting them in. It's going to be some sort of off the shelf, some sort of vulnerability that's been around for a while, some sort of technique that's been around for a long time. One of my favorite things to do is I like listening to the Darknet Diaries. Super well done, a professional podcast. They talk through a number of times in there, just various breaches, and it's the same boring sort of stuff over and over again. And then I talk to clients all the time, and they're trying to set up this overly complicated settings to keep the bad guys out. But then you ask about some of the simple things, like, well, that's not important, and it's frankly misfocused because the simpler stuff. I mean, that's how the bad guys are getting in, right? And even if you talk about your real APT, your true nation state APT, they're not going to bring down their brand new special hammer until they absolutely have to. You don't lead with that because if you use as an APT the off-the-shelf tools, good luck with attribution, right? Because if every single bad guy on the face of the planet has this exact same tool and you're the APT and you're using it, there is no way they can trace it back to who actually launched this attack. APT is kind of a lie in many ways. It's mostly just the persistent threat, and frankly, the persistence oftentimes is in a way itself a little bit of a lie. Let's take a look at an example here. I'm stealing this example from my previous presentation, Equifax, right? And I'm not trying to beat up on the people at Equifax, but this is an important case study. So with Equifax, let's walk through some of the timeline here. March 2017, so almost, 3 years ago today, earlier this week. It's actually March 10th is my brother and my brother-in-law's birthday. But the Apache Struts vulnerability was released, right? Announced a cert, everybody gets the patch around that day. Cool. Now, this is a significant vulnerability, critical risk. Ideally, what organizations are doing is patching this very quickly. What we saw in this specific case was with Equifax, we know the date here was March 12th. This is when the breach happened. This is 2 months after the vulnerability is announced. Now, if you think this through, we talk about APT, right? The Advanced Persistent Threat. This is an off-the-shelf tools, off-the-shelf exploit that has been around for months, and this is the way in, right? How advanced is it if they're actually using just, readily available tools? How persistent are they actually if it took them 2 months to do that? Now, of course, no organization that gets breached is going to come out and say, yeah, we were breached by just some threat actor, right? They want to say the APT so it sounds worse. But realistically, that's not often going to be the case, right? And of course, they were inside the network for a long time. Since between detection and the initial disclosure was 141 days, so about 5 months, and nearly 3 months between when the breach happened and our detection. The key here, of course, is we've got to get some of our patching. That's kind of another whole discussion on developing patches and identifying vulnerabilities. I actually wrote a course where we talk through some more of this and the difficulties sometimes in identifying these vulnerabilities if they're not readily available on the surface. But the key here is the bad guys didn't do anything necessarily special. It was off the shelf, and it took them months to do it, right? So definitely not going to be advanced nor persistent. Now, this is one of my favorite one. This one I got from Derek Banks. This one absolutely cracks me up. So he was on a pen test trying to use Netcat. Downloaded Netcat, and the AV just dinged him right away. No question. Just bam, it was gone. It just deleted the file, and he was stuck. So what Derek did, it's so dumb. It's so brilliant. I love it. What he did is he went to Nmap. Now, the Nmap project, they have a tool called NCAT. NCAT is like Nmap, but it's got extra features. The beautiful thing is it's part of a well-known project, right? Every one of us knows Nmap and have probably used Nmap at some point in time. NCAT is part of that. So he downloaded NCAT, and it worked just great. Right? There was no, at no point in time did he have to try to re-encode. Did he have to try to encrypt his shell code? Did he have to re-implement this in some sort of tool and rewrite it in C# and then inject it into memory or whatever? It was just using another tool from somebody else, and it worked just fine. This is one of those examples where trying this simple stuff works. And trying it first, right? This how much time did it save to try this versus doing your own manual encoding? If you've spent time doing that, that can be a tremendous amount of time, and you're really just throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks. Beautiful, beautifully elegant. I love this. Simple, frankly, a little bit dirty, but it worked absolutely fantastically well, right? The other thing that we always see, now what I did is yesterday I just wanted to check on some more ideas. So I wrote a tweet, and I've got a link to the tweet at the very end because there's hundreds of responses for people that responded with simple, dumb hacks that happened. And there was so many with the bad passwords. And this is one of those situations where, like talking to clients, where they're trying to fix all these weird edge case security issues. Meanwhile, everybody in their organization has these crap-tastic passwords, right? I mean, we get like winter 2019. And of course, the reason is, according to, what forever ago, Moses came down from a mountain with a third tablet. On the third tablet, he said, "Thou shalt change 9 passwords every 90 days. And of course, people can't remember their passwords, and they hate calling the help desk after a while, so they end up just looking outside and essentially deriving their password from nature, right? Because outside, the weather changes every 90 days. Right? Probably snowy where many of you are, and 90 days from now, we'll probably see some flowers, and 90 days from now, it'll be nice and hot and sunny, and then 90 days later, it'll be the trees are turning colors. So they can literally look outside and see their password. And of course, there's a winter this year and a winter next year. We got capital W, lowercase enter, and they need a number. And also, they can't repeat the last 7,842 passwords, so they need another way to differentiate some of those passwords. So they simply do, of course, they add the year. And maybe they need a special character. There's going to be the season, then the year, then of course you're probably playing along at home here, the bang, right? Top left key on the keyboard. And there were so many tweets related to this where people just used these types of passwords to get in. And if you work at an organization, I'm sure many of you are on the blue team, ideally you implement a tool to ban these passwords, right? If you end up telling users not to use these passwords, to be honest, that's not going to work. You can see the tweet here from Anders. I'm going to mess this name up. Leon, where he says he did a password spray for an entire company and got 30%. So a password spray is you're going to try a few passwords for everybody in the organization. I was doing this a number of years ago, and at one organization, they had it was like fall coming into winter, trying fall or winter, frankly, fall, autumn or winter with the year. I think it was, I don't remember what year it was now, but we had 16.3% of the people with that set of that password. That means you go up to somebody, you take a die, you roll it, you get a 6, they have that season and year type of password. And then you see organizations focusing on all these other much more complicated security controls when they're missing a simple one here. And when it comes back to the training, right, we tell users don't pick this season and year, but if you think about it from their perspective, they just want to get their work done. And they don't want to be in this stupid security meeting just as much as you don't want to be in the, whatever other training it be at your organization that doesn't relate to your day job. So they're sitting there tired in their seats and they hear this season and year and they're like, you know what, this is a great idea. I'm going to do exactly that. And it could be anything like that. It doesn't have to be the season and year. If you're going to ban these passwords, which you should, other things that should be banned should be your company name. You definitely want to make sure that the username and password don't match. Those are going to be some significant things there. But this one works time and time again. This is the gift that keeps on giving. So defenders, even if you can't get the blocks in place to ban these passwords, I would highly encourage you, get a process in place where you can dump the passwords, crack them, find these, provide additional training to these people, and then force them to change their password. Fun ones are default credentials related to that. I was in one organization and the password was similar to like Orange 1. And of course, if the user changes the password, what has it become? Orange 2. So those default passwords, we are now priming the pump. It might not be one of the normal quote-unquote default passwords or one passwords that we see, for example, the season and year, but now you're priming the pump. And we saw in that organization, there was Orange 2, Orange 3, Orange 4. We went up all the way to 99. And we had, I think it was well over a quarter of the organization with that type of a password. So if that's part of your policy, burn that thing with fire, right? Another lovely one. This one cracked me up, coming back from some of the tweets. I had seen this. I wasn't quite sure how widespread this was actually going to be, but I had a number of people talk about test accounts. My favorite here, Adam Baldwin, top right. I typed ASDF while demonstrating username enumeration in a login page, and it worked. It was a test user created by the developer, and that was left in place. I've seen things like that. I thought it was just a random lucky thing. No, there's another one bottom right here, WireGhoul, Freddy Krueger, and worked just fine. I actually had a situation, and this one was actually kind of bad, similar to David here, where I was doing a test and I came across a domain admin account. It was actually for another pen test company. No, I won't share the name of the pen test company. And that account was left around from about the same time I was there last year, and led me to believe that it was their previous pen test the year before. Able to log back in with that, right? We want to make sure we clean that stuff up. That should be as part of a process. If you do a pen test, have your IR, have someone in your team do the cleanup. If it comes to those test accounts, make sure you clean those up, because invariably, if it's a test account, it's going to have a craptastic credential. Right? Other lovely things that are just so beautiful. I almost feel dirty that unfortunately, or I mean, of course, from the offensive person's perspective, I guess in a way, fortunately, work all too well. I've seen it a number of times where you attempt to log in and the page is like, you know what? That password doesn't work. Why don't you try this one? There's a number of examples where these credentials are just floating around. Fail login, it says, oh, by the way, try this. Look in the page source. Is it high tech? No. Does it work? Way too often, right? We can see here like Zach's, what cracks me up, a couple other similar ones as well, where to make life a little bit easier, I'm also going to go to the next page because this is all the same, is what admins will do is they sort of assume that Active Directory is invisible to end users, right? Active Directory stores all the account information. They assume that you can't look at that unless you're one of the IT admins. So you see this all over the place where the password is stored as an attribute in Active Directory, most of the time in clear text, which means if you have some sort of tool to look at that, boom, you're just going to rain those credentials down on you. And of course, this is kind of echoed by those number of people that I've seen online. I don't want to get too much into the passwords. We beat up passwords, but frankly, I mean, it just happens time and time again, and we're focusing on all these heavy other projects. And if we could just get rid of the password problem, a lot of life sort of goes away. Let me jump ahead just a touch. So you're probably thinking, like, well, of course, if you've got crappy passwords. The answer then is MFA. Now, one of the guys on my team, Mike Saunders, like he loves to bring MFA to its knees. It cracks me up. He actually, in the last 2 or 3 pen tests he was working on, just broke the MFA. And it was frankly kind of a dumb break. So what happened is, hit the login page, entered the username, entered the password. It asked for the token, and all he simply did is then redirect to the rest of the page, force browse to the website. And the website's like, oh, fair enough. Like the website was thinking, oh, if you got to this point, the only way you could get here is if you authenticated. So clearly you must be okay. So, you know, we sort of call that the shopping cart problem, right? With the shopping cart, you put something in the shopping cart, you go to shipping, you pay the bill, and then you finish the process. The shopping cart issue is you just skip the payment piece, and the only way, of course, that a normal user is going to get to that complete my checkout process is if they went through the process. So the server just assumes, hey, we're good to go, and we get stuff for free, right? So the MFA, it's awesome, but make sure that you test to make sure that's properly implemented, right? Let me go back a little bit. So we're talking about the passwords there, right? All right, let's change gears a little bit now. This kind of goes back to, hey, I was one of I was kind of new at one point, right? Of course, we all were. And I wanted to learn more about IoT hacking. So I didn't know what to do. So what happened was I looked at a friend of mine's blog post. He had this lovely blog post here. This is 2012 on how he found this issue in this TrendNet camera, right? So let's walk through what he did. So what he grabbed is he grabbed the firmware and then he used a tool called binwalk. Now in 2012, binwalk, it didn't have all the features we have today, but what it did, and frankly does, is it looks at some things like firmware and it will identify different section headers. Because oftentimes our firmware is just a bunch of files that are kind of like duct taped together into one file. So what binwalk does is it looks for those various headers, and the newer versions will actually chop it up for you. Now, back in the olden days, you had to do that chopping yourself. You had to get your Ginsu out, chop this sucker up. So here's an example of where he used DD to chop up the file into a couple of pieces. Now, he simply looked at the third file. The third file, if you ran the file command on it, now what file does is it checks for, quote, magic, looks for specific headers or footers in the file to identify the file type, and found that it was just a Linux file system. Okay, cool. Just unzipped it, uncompressed it, and then mounted it and started looking around the file system. Now, in his case, he found a directory called server. Inside server was a directory called CGI bin. Inside that was a directory called Anani. Take a guess what Anani stands for, right? Anani, of course, is going to be anonymous. So it gave anonymous access, which means anybody could access this webcam and view the stream. This is his page. Pardon the words at the bottom, but this is a straight screenshot from his blog. Simple access. Now, pretty straightforward. So what I did, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do this same thing. So I bought a different camera off of Amazon, walked through the same sort of process where extracted, did DD. It looked a little bit different, extracted the file system, right? Use other people's tools and techniques. Don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. Frankly, maybe you even buy the same product and walk through the exact same process somebody else did. Grab this, take it home. Now, if you grab a Linux file system, because mine extracted into a Linux file system, where's one of the first places you're going to look at? Like the first file. I'm assuming most of you are saying Etsy password or maybe Etsy shadow. Well, with old Linux systems, the password hashes were actually stored in Etsy password, right? Hence the name. Then we learned, hey, it's not a great idea to have password hashes publicly readable, world readable by all users. So we moved that into Etsy shadow. Now that's old Linux systems and also brand new IoT devices. So this device had, one Linux account. It was root. So because everything's running as root, what's the point of having an Etsy shadow? And also the passwords were stored using this really fancy encryption called base64, right? Base64, of course, is not encryption. So all we had to do is just decode it. I mean, you could technically just decode it by hand. So we took a look at this, looked in the web interface, saw this user admin, and then looked in Etsy password and saw admin. Looked in my Etsy password, saw a viewer, saw that in the web interface. Cool. Looked in Etsy password, found this factory test user. It was not in the web page. So it was this backdoor account for, well, frankly, test that gave us test access to the camera, and it was a backdoor account that provided access to the device. And it was literally just me. I'm not pretending I'm like necessarily special here, but I just followed somebody else's hack by numbers. I mean, I felt a little bit dirty, frankly. Now, I didn't feel so dirty when I did a bug bounty and they gave me like $4,000 for it. But it doesn't have to be oftentimes that complicated. A lot of people are saying, well, it's getting harder these days. True, but there's still a lot of relatively simple stuff out there. Try some of that simple stuff first. You don't have to reverse engineer the ARM code. You don't have to reverse engineer some random HTTP server. Just look for some of the dumb and dead simple stuff first. Another one of these sort of situations. I had an iPad, and I travel a lot because I teach and I do consulting. I had my iPad, I have an Apple TV, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to watch my Amazon Prime on my Apple TV, but it was back in the days when Amazon and Apple, they had this huge pissing match. It was just this weird battle, and then the consumers were the ones taking the brunt of it. But I was watching Amazon Prime on my iPad, and I couldn't watch it on my Apple TV. I wanted to watch it on a nice TV, but Amazon's like, nope, sorry, can't do it. So I looked at the configuration. Every time I launched the app, it would pull a configuration down from Amazon. Inside the configuration was a line that said AirPlay enabled false. I was like, you bunch of jerks. The capability here, the feature is here, but you're turning off my screen sharing basically out of spite. I paid for the content, I paid for my Prime, I paid for the Apple TV, I paid for the iPad. Like, none of this is theft in any way, shape, or form. They were just saying, sorry, you can't do it this way because we're pissed off at each other. So, of course, I did like any reasonable hacker would, is I set up burp, and when the connection came down, I changed that AirPlay enabled from false to true. Then I saw an error. And it said there was an application signing there. The configuration was improperly signed. Scroll down through the configuration. At the very bottom was a signature. Now, this is a situation where I typically ask my class, hey, what next? And what I typically see, this is always, it's really enlightening, and this is one of the pieces that kind of led me to this talk, is I'll see the more advanced people say, well, let's reverse engineer how the signing takes place and see if we have overrides, or is the key available, or something like that. Meanwhile, I'll see somebody new and they're like, well, what happens if you just delete the signature, right? Like, how dead, dumb, simple, simply just going into the configuration with burp, deleting that signature. It would come down to the device. The app would receive the configuration, attempt to verify the signature, and then say, oh yeah, well, you don't have a signature? Fair enough. Continue on. And it worked just fine. And I've seen this more than once. Again, how much time would it have taken to reverse engineering the entire signature process? And maybe we don't find a vulnerability there. Dead simple, just try the simple thing here first, right? We talked about the MFA. Let's skip on to the next one. One of my other sort of favorite bugs was the macOS bug, right? So you could just hit enter a few times with macOS, and you try to get root prompt. It would be like, yeah, fair enough. You tried. You did good enough. I'm just going to give you root level access. Love that bug. Is it high tech? Is it fancy? Is there any sort of code reverse engineering? No. Some dude or dudette just sat at the computer and mashed enter a couple of times in frustration, found this lovely bug. Related to that is my favorite vulnerability of all time. So we had MySQL, so MySQL. This is a little bit old now, but still my favorite bug. What happens is you would authenticate to MySQL, and 1 out of 256 times, it would just say, all right, fair enough. I call this one the soccer trophy, right? You know, the soccer trophy, doesn't matter how terrible your team is, everyone gets the award. That's this. It's like, hey, you know what? Good job. You tried hard enough. I'm going to let you in anyway. The story that I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, is somebody ran a vuln scanner against their MySQL, and the vuln scanner reported a specific password as working. The security engineer went back, attempted to log in with that password, and it didn't work. Tried it again, and it didn't work. And then just got frustrated and put it in a for loop, and then all of a sudden, like 200 tries later, it worked, right? This bug just cracks me up. I can't even imagine the look on this engineer's face when they figured this one out. But again, just a little bit of dumb sort of brute force made that one work quite well. So if you want to read some more, here's the original tweet. There is a whole giant list related to the bunch of simple, dumb hacks. There's the long address down at the very bottom. No one wants to type that, so I've got a short link here, redsiege.com/simple-hack. So one of the keys here, of course, is you never know too much. None of these attacks are necessarily that we talk through required super advanced knowledge. And I find myself, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get stuck in my mind that this next thing, this current thing that I'm working on, it's going to be super hard. So I need to take this to 11 to pull off the hack. When realistically, this is like a 0.1, where just trying the simple stuff first. Related to that, here's an example. So here's an example. Let's sort of walk through this together a little bit. This actually won me a free trip to Las Vegas and a black hat. It's a little bit modified here, but I had some data like this. So there was an app that worked on your Android device at the time, and the goal was whoever scored enough points in the app would get this free trip. And I'm like, cool. I've never been to black hat before. I want to go. So I was like, all right, let's make this work. So what happened is when you registered your device, it would send a request kind of similar to this. This is just mostly made up, but the format is largely the same. Send this request to their servers. And after this, you would get 10 points. 10 points for your first registering. Okay, good deal. So if we take a look at this, we can see magic here at the beginning and then data. So I was like, at first, I'm like, hey, okay, cool. How can I get more points? And this is the time where I've demonstrated this in a couple of, specifically in my mobile pen test course that I used to teach. I asked the class, like, what next, right? How can I score more points? And immediately, a significant portion of the class was like, well, that looks like base 64. Let's decode that. But think Dumberly, right? What is the more simple approach? And I hope there's a couple of you at home saying, you know what? Screw decoding. What happens if we just send this over and over and over again? Exactly. And that worked perfect. So what happened was we would just take the same post, send it in over and over and over and over again, and we would start scoring points like crazy. Now this, at the time, a friend of mine, Tim Tomes, I mean, I'm not saying he's not a friend of mine, he's still a friend of mine, but we both were competing for this. So I'm sending in my request. I've got this quick little, I think I was just typing a text file into Netcat and then just wrapping it in a for loop. And then Tim Tomes, Laymaster 53, he started doing the exact same thing, and he started passing me on the scoreboard. So then I ended up using like 2 threads. So he tried using 3 threads, and I'm trying like 4. And his internet was faster. So he's beaten me. And I ended up spooling this up on a bunch of different like DigitalOcean boxes and stuff so I could blow past him. And I remember it was Mother's Day weekend. We were going out. We were in Texas. We were out to breakfast with my mother-in-law. And I remember refreshing that scoreboard. So I'm like, I should pass him in about 10 minutes. About 10 minutes comes past, and I'm getting text messages now from Tomes. Now, granted, we're at my mother-in-law's Mother's Day breakfast, and I probably should have been messing with my phone. But he starts texting me. He's like, hey, man, what's going on? And I thought he was just asking, like, how did I get to go so much faster? Then we look back, the entire website is down. So they comes back up a little while later, and they say, sorry, no more replay attacks. And they had actually fixed the replay. So we tried to do this again, we would get no additional points. So at this point, Tim is ahead of me by just a little bit. I'm like, well, crap. Now I'm stuck, right? I still want to go. Tim's ahead of me. I'm upset, right? So at this point, what's the next step? Of course, the answer at this point is then, well, we have to do a little bit of reverse engineering. The short version is we took apart the APK file with just a freely available tool, did a search for magic. I mean, it was that simple. Just searched for magic, found this function that essentially what it did is it took the data portion, you can see that here, it took the data portion, base 64 encoded it again, grabbed the last, I think it was, if I can remember correctly, last 8 characters, and then the 7th character, or something like that. And that's how it built the quote-unquote magic. So now what we're able to do is take the data, regenerate the unique ID that was used to count as a registration, rebuild our magic. We're like some sort of a wizard at this point, generating magic on the fly, right? Like I'm all Harry Potter up in this stuff. And then started scoring again. And then at that point, Tim and I went back and forth to our head-to-head, and he started writing his with multi-threaded. So again, stuck with that situation, right? Tim's got the better internet connection. Tim Tomes, I guess they were both Tims. That could be a little bit confusing. He's got the better internet connection. I'm still losing. Now, an important thing to note here is if you remember a little bit about the specs and how HTTP works, we have what's called an HTTP heap alive. So what was happening with our scripts is it would do SYN, SYNAC, ACK, send the data, and then tear down the connection. And then we would send it again, SYN, SYNAC, ACK, send the data, tear down the connection. So I was like, you know what? What if we just left the connection open? So we don't have the additional overhead of the SYN, SYNAC, ACK, and the teardown. We SYN, SYNAC, ACK, and then just data, and just spam it as quickly as possible. And it's exactly what it ended up doing. Again, simple, nothing fancy there, nothing like necessarily sort of the brute force. Ultimately, I ended up getting, it was funny, I talked to Tim and I told him what I was doing after I got well ahead of him. He's like, oh, that's pretty cool. I'm like, dude, can you just let me win this? He's like, oh, you wanted to go? I'm like, hey, hell yeah, I wanted to go. He's like, oh, I'm already going to Black Hat. So anyways, I got my free trip there. But again, there wasn't anything necessarily fancy with this. The very simple piece, the replay up front, dead simple. Literally, you can capture it with burp and just click, and then just get sort of free points, free money, sort of in a way, if you will. Another important thing, especially as senior people, I saw the quote, forget the exact details, but confidence is not about being confident in always being right. It's about being confident to say, I don't know. It took me a while to figure that out because I figured as an expert, I'm supposed to be the smartest person in the room and I'm supposed to know everything. But there is a tremendous amount of power to say, you know what, I don't know. Also, you're going to have new people on your team, teams with different people with different perspectives and different experiences. And as the more senior type person, it's really easy for us to say, you know, a better way to do that. And we all work with those types of people. The person who's the know-it-all, who always knows a better way to do something. That's great. But if I'm always talking about the better ways to do it, at no point in time am I learning, which means I'm going to absolutely plateau. One of the most valuable things I've learned is sit back, shut up, and listen. Any one of these attacks that we talked about earlier, this could have been some sort of new person, a noob, if you will, could have come up and say, hey, you know what if we just try this dead simple way, right? And if I had squashed them enough times with, here's a better way to do it, they're not willing to speak up, right? Get that perspective. There might be a better way to do it. But I want to see, it's empowering. I remember being the new person, and I worked in an environment where my manager always knew a better way to do it. And it was soul crushing. He was a smart guy, but even when I was right, I was in a way wrong because he was the smart person in the room. Don't squash that. And it's really hard. You see it all the time in IT where we kind of want to show off with our experience. Don't be that person. Get some of that input, use it. There's going to be a tremendous amount of value there. And frankly, it's going to help you learn some of that as well. So take the simple approach, right? All these different attacks that we saw, try the simple stuff first. Frankly, from a defensive perspective, we talked about passwords. If you're implementing the latest and greatest DLP, cool. You're missing some of the mark here if you've got regularly end users are using some of these terrible passwords that we talked about before. Or you've got other gaping holes that you kind of just don't want to deal with, but you've got budget because, I don't know, some higher up went to RSA and bought this latest and greatest tool here. We need those couple of pieces. Last year, an IANS event where we were talking through vulnerability management and talking through the process, and one of the people in the classroom, or the forum rather, was saying what he did is he just gave each business unit 3 vulnerabilities to work on each month. That's it, just 3. The 3 that he thought were the biggest risk. And it was beautiful in its simplicity, because any group can be like, yeah, I can fix 3 things. Cool, I got it. But if you give them this giant list, they're just overwhelmed and they don't know which one to do first, or the list is too long, so they get none of it done. But if you break it down to these sort of simple steps with the biggest risk first, instead of the fancy-pantsy new tool, right? Another thing I would encourage you to do too, so I'm sort of trying to pump up the new people a little bit. Even if you're new, you have a perspective. You have a different perspective. You have different experiences than I do. I want to hear that. Time and time again, I hear people say, well, you know what, I'm not ready to give a talk. I don't know the things to say. I don't have the latest and greatest new attack. And I'm ironically trying to paraphrase John in front of John, which is making me wet my pants a little bit. But he had some sort of story, and maybe John will jump here in at the end and complete this story. But he told me, he's like, Tim, look, you've got some experiences. You're a pretty smart guy, which I was humbled by. But he's like, don't try to do your talks that try to impress the wizards, right? You've got people in the room who are just starting out, who are maybe on the blue team or maybe in IT, and they need useful, digestible information. If you come here and you try to sort of, in a way, show off and dazzle everybody, you might impress the wizards, but is it going to be accessible to everybody across the board? And I see this because we'll write blog posts that are more advanced. And frankly, the more simple ones are the ones that we get way more hits on, because frankly, that's what people need. So if that's you, if you've never given a talk before, go out there and give it. Frankly, go out there and give a talk. It doesn't have to be on a tool that you wrote. You could give a talk at your local event or whatever it might be on somebody else's tool. But give me your perspective on it. Tell me why it's interesting to you. Because that's what's interesting to me sitting in the audience. I want to see your passion and your interest come through in these talks. I want to see your perspective on it. Why is it important to you? And again, get out there and put yourself out there. There's plenty of different ways to do this. There's local cons, there's local meetups. Of course, there's some of the bigger ones as well. Many different conferences, WWHF Hacking Fest included, has help for the new speakers out there. Do it. Please do that. The other sort of fear point is people are always afraid of, hey, you know what? The more advanced people, these quote unquote wizards, they're going to look down upon me. At no point in time have I ever seen this. And frankly, if they do, screw those people, because everybody else can use these types of talks. So with that, that is going to wrap up my talk. There's a lovely QR code that gives you access to the slides if you want those. Now, I get people who are like, I'm not clicking your QR code. Fine, don't. But this would be the worst way to hack you ever between my name and two different ways to contact. So with that, that's going to wrap up the talk. Questions? Do we have any questions I can answer here?
So it looks like we do have some questions. Who is the best noob you know? That's a Kevin Johnson question, by the way.
Huh.
So I think that you can look at that as who is the best person at pen testing that you've seen that just got started and you're like, holy crap, they're really good.
Well, see, what's interesting, I was seeing that as a different perspective. I like that idea, but I think a real power is if you're an experienced pen tester and you can sort of go back and break things down into simple. And not to kiss butt here, but I think for example, John, when he breaks things down to his analogies, God, it's dead freaking simple. Josh Wright's another one where breaks things down to simple, basic steps where you're like, oh yeah, why didn't I understand that sooner, right? Yeah. The other one, holy smokes. I don't know. I'd have to think that through. You got to prep me on that. Thanks, Kevin. Could you at least text me so I could have thought that one through?
Of course it's Kevin that asks that really, really hard question, right?
I love questions like that. Kevin's the guy. If you ask me who we're going to ask that question, I'm like, oh, totally Kevin.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I guess, okay, I'll go with this. I'll take a shot, buy you some time. I remember, and this, Kevin is what kind of primed it for me. We were doing a pen test with Secure Ideas and BHIS years ago. Kevin, I don't know if you remember this one. And there were like two amazing vulnerabilities that came out of it. One was the vulnerability, I think, Kevin, it was your team. Actually, I'm just going to promote Kevin. It'll just be so much easier just to promote him. But I think it was the Secure Ideas team that found out if you purchased a -1 thing, it credited your account, the cost of that.
Nice.
So I'm going to make him a panelist. It's real quick. I cannot revoke this once it's been granted. Kevin, don't make me regret this. So he should be coming on here in a second. I think that was Kevin's team. You purchased a negative. It was like a two-factor token thing. But
That's exactly what it was.
And then it was the first pen test of Ethan Robish from Black Hills Information Security. And he found this really ridiculously cool way of executing a cross-site request forgery attack. This particular customer, if I remember, Kevin, like these guys had money. They were very, very good. And everything was very, very solid. And it was like one of your junior testers and like my junior tester came out with these two mind-blowing vulnerabilities right out of the gate.
Yes. Yeah, it's always amazing. I think Tim's point of paying attention to noobs and not crushing them by always correcting them or giving them your idea is some of the best advice I've ever heard.
Well, and I also think kind of watching and making sure your team doesn't crush itself. Going back to some other interns years ago, whenever we, kind of start them out by going through vulnerability assessment scanning results, we had one intern, Kelsey, at the time. She was just going through this stuff meticulously. She was treating it like an accountant and going through everything and researching everything and grouping it by vulnerability and plugin ID. And I was in the room with the two interns, Kelsey and the other intern. And the other intern was just downplaying everything that she said. And it was just kind of putting down her ideas, and that was stupid. I don't know why you're wasting time on that. And Kelsey was finding the vulnerabilities. The other intern was not. But the other intern sounded like he was a total badass hacker. And one of those interns now works for me and has for a number of years. And Kelsey, another one, I can't remember his name, but the way that she approached things was absolutely the right way. Meticulous and curiosity were the two driving factors.
Yes, absolutely. The ability for a team, pay attention. I will also say self-sabotage is bad. People have gotten so ingrained with the idea that they don't know, that you bring them onto your team and they're just doubting and doubting and doubting. And your job is to make them not doubt.
Well, dude, I want to talk a little bit about you when you joined InGuardians. At the time they were Intel Guardians, because if I remember correctly, you had imposter syndrome real bad when you started.
I don't know why you say that in past tense.
Because good point. All right.
I don't want to talk about it because it's Tim's presentation. I feel rude stepping in.
No, that's the whole point. I mean, and I'm going to let the noob talk. No, seriously, no. I mean,
by the way, your explanation of what my question was is exactly correct, and I want you to add your own name to that list of people who are able to break things down in very simple explanations.
Yeah, but it's one of those, you learn that by seeing other people do that, right? To be able to do that is tremendously useful. But please, I think your story is valuable input here, so please go for it.
Well, I mean, I joined InGuardians. I'm so ingrained that we're not allowed to call them the other name. So I joined InGuardians, and it was some of the biggest names in the industry that I knew of, and I then worked with them, and I knew nothing. It didn't matter what. And the idea of working with Tom Liston and Mike Poore and Matt Carpenter and like, it's just wow, right? I mean, I learned Linux by reading stuff from Jay Beal, and then I had to be on calls with him and explain to him what I was doing with a Linux box. You want to talk about pressure? It was just nuts. And then you start realizing that every single person you look up to is looking up to you or people like you or everybody else, right? Like it's all the same.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to do that transition.
If I could add in there too, like my first job out of college, actually sort of second, I interned there, left for a year, went back, but it was the single worst job experience. I mean, we were putting in extra hours. I mean, I thought about like jumping off of buildings, and that's not an exaggeration, but it was miserable, and I kept getting squashed. And I remember going to like the next job, and the boss man was asking for input, and I was like, "What is this?" Like I didn't know what to do with it. Yeah. It's like, look, we hired you on the team because we think you're good at this. Of course, we want your input, and that was just, I don't know, mind-blowingly enabling, and frankly, made me want to work harder and make me a better person. It was so much more fulfilling, right?
But I think no matter what, I think a lot of us go back in our history, and we had someone that saw us in the early part of our careers, knew we were an idiot, but still saw kind of that spark, that curiosity, still willing to put the time and investment into it.
Mike Poore.
Yeah, Mike Poore.
I took a class from Mike, and he took a bunch of students to dinner, and I got to sit next to him. And this was back in the days of base, right? And Mike was talking to me, and Mike just basically said, "What do you want to be? Like when you grow up, what do you want to be?" And I'm like,
when you grow up,
you know what I mean? Like I haven't grown up still. I'm 47, but and it's not my birthday. I said to Mike, I want to be you. I want to do what you're doing. And he sat with me. We finished dinner. We went back to the hotel and sat. I don't know what time we finally went back to our rooms. And he just walked me through stuff. Like, well, have you thought about this? Have you done this? And then he followed back up with me, right? Like it was, hey, what are you up to? What are you doing? What are you doing next? It was amazing. And I hope that I get to be able to do that for other people, right? Like that's what we all should aspire to.
Kevin, it's okay. I still want to be Mike Poore.
Everybody wants to be Mike Poore. Come on. And now he's forging swords. How could you not want to be him?
If you guys don't know the voice, Jonathan Hamm has joined the panel, and he also has a great intern story as well.
I'll tell it really quick. Yeah, nobody believes.
Old home week.
Nobody believes that. No, I'll tell it as quick as I can. It was years and years ago when I was still at LMG and got called into massive project for one of the biggest top 3 software companies on the planet. And one of the projects was they had, some people in the audience probably have heard this, but they had sent out a corporate-wide memo to every business unit on the planet that if you're going to be spitting syslog, spit it at this IP address. So they had they had like 27,000 sources of syslog spitting at a virtual IP address load balance, behind which they had a massive array of our syslog servers, behind which they had an even more massive array of network attached storage, the likes of which I couldn't even have fathomed. And all they could do with it was check the box saying, aggregating logs, yes. Retaining logs, yes.
Hard drive light blink.
Yeah, I mean, they couldn't do anything with it. And so the first chore that fell to me was, we need to be able to make sense of this, because we're going to start shoving all that into Splunk, but we need to be able to know what is the thing of the 27,000 sources, what is the thing that's generating these syslog logs? I took one of my interns at LMG, who was just fresh out of the University of Montana with his CS degree and a copious knowledge of Python.
Yeah, this is Eric, right?
No, this wasn't Eric. This is David Harrison. I'll say
David. Okay. I hope it ends well for David. I don't know how the story ends, but let's hope.
Well, no. Well, the way it went was, I figure, all right, either I'm writing this in Perl and he's going to have to learn Perl to work with me, or I'm going to have to learn Python to work with him. So I bent and we did it in Python, but the only way that it could work out was we had to do real machine learning. And David was amazing. He wrote machine learning code in Perl that by the time we trained this program, because if you know machine learning, you have to tell it how, right? By the time we trained this machine learning algorithm, it could pick out, it could know the source of a syslog entry by make and model of the source off of a single syslog entry with 5 nines of accuracy.
And that's literally the only way that you could parse through that much data to try to make sense of it, right?
Yeah, well, that was the only way. Yeah, but that was an intern, right, fresh out of college with his CS degree, figured out how to do that. I was mere support. I was the one I was training the algorithm that he wrote.
That's because you're used to Perl, that write once, read never language.
I knew that was...
I haven't written a scrap of Perl since, man.